is someone that we praise but was actually a horrible person? Story 1. Mr. Rogers actually has a very little known but horrible skeleton in his closet. Just kidding. Mr. Rogers is literally Jesus edit. Okay, I didn't mean to bring religion into this, guys. I was just using Jesus as a comparison. And also, thank you so much for whoever bought me gold. I will shortly upload a picture of my shoe in gratitude. Edit 2. Boy, was that awkward on public transportation. Story 2. Charles Dickens dumped his wife of 10 kids and 22 years for an 18-year-old mistress. When she called him out on it, he publicly called her a fat idiot. Story 3. Does anyone actually praise Columbus anymore? I've heard people shitting on him far more than I've heard them praising him. I'm not saying he should be praised, I'm saying I've seen his name pop up several times in this thread, yet he is not a figure many people actually praise. It depends on what you mean by horrible. Martin Luther King Jr. is probably the most iconic figure to help give black people equality. Yet he cheated on his wife plenty of times, and people close to him believe that he looked down on gay people as well. As several others have pointed out, he also plagiarized his thesis. Edit. I understand that MLK Jr. was extremely important and his actions made the world a better place. I'm also not saying that because he cheated it somehow takes away what he had done. All I'm saying is that he sounded like a giant in his personal life. It also amazes me how many people pass off that he didn't like homosexuality as oh, it was the 1960s, so it wasn't as progressive. Yet will condemn every white person who didn't like black people in the 1960s when it wasn't as progressive. Story 4. Not a single person but the Kennedy family. Especially Ted Kennedy had an affair with his secretary, got into a car accident with her while DUI, then left her to die. Story 5. Michael Jordan was a bit of an hole. Can't knock on his game, but you can find a lot of bad about him with a simple Google search if you're interested. Story 6. Before the whole raping thing, Bill Cosby. If you ever hear some of the comedians and actresses he has worked with, a lot of them say how much of a he was to everyone. Story 7. Andrew Jackson. From the spoil system to the Trail of Tears, thanks again, Mr. Jackson. Let us honor your achievements by placing you on our $20 bill. Story 8. Henry Ford. Major Nazi supporter, Schach sympathizer. If I remember correctly, he even had a picture of Hitler on his desk and made countless items for the Nazis, Germany. Story 9. You could probably take any hero and find something truly despicable about them, just as I'm sure you could take any villain and find a decent character trait. The question of whether or not they're horrible people really comes down to individual perspectives on morality. For example, it's a little-known fact that the mediocre artist Adolf Hitler was actually a horrible racist. On the opposite side, evil overlord Bill Gates has donated nearly $30 billion to a variety of humanitarian causes. Story 10. Chris Gardner, the man who Will Smith played in The Pursuit of Happiness, is considered to be an amazing success story, an inspiration, and a great father. He actually cheated on his wife with a dental student and got her pregnant. He then started dating said dental student and reportedly beat her. He was even taken in by police because of a domestic abuse charge. Story 11. Fucking Oprah. Oprah is the only reason people ever even started to pay attention to this entire Jenny McCarthy autism vaccines bullshit. She's the only reason people trust Dr. Phil to give advice. Spoiler alert, he should not be counseling people. She's the reason my grandma says but Dr. Oz said if I eat lot of green coffee and run acai berries on my face, I'll look 40. Still love you though, Grandma. Oprah has caused a lot of bullshit. Fuck Oprah. Story 12. Bill Murray and my former favorite actor Gary Oldman both abused their wives. Reddit fucking loves Bill Murray. Though, ETA, I stand corrected, abuse allegations against Oldman turned out to be false. Yay. Story 13. Jimmy Savile. Over here in the UK, he had his own TV show and was a celebrity. Until after he died, it was revealed that he was fixing more than the children's wishes. I guess it's past tense, being praised, but yeah. Story 14. A little less known, but one of so many names that fall into the same category. Former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Meles Zenawi. Praised by Bill Gates, Obama, and co. Bud is responsible for repression and many deaths among the poor. Story 15. Richard Dawkins is simply immature. His charity was stolen from, and he is simply rude. The only reason he is relevant in the mainstream is because he wrote an edgy book. If it wasn't for that, he would have just been another scientist in another lab. Written about only in scientific journals. Edit. Seems I have offended the Church of Dawkins. Story 16. I wouldn't say horrible, but Nelson Mandela is given a free ride on a lot of things. I'm going from memory here and on mobile, so I'm sure someone will correct any errors. For starters, he promised SA the Freedom Charter, essentially a 1945 UK-style welfare state, while simultaneously selling much of the country's industry off to foreign companies. He'd written a lot in Robben Island about how the only way SA could go forward was by nationalizing industry. He essentially promised a welfare state he knew he couldn't provide, and doomed the poorest of the nation. John Pilgar's Freedom. Next Time is a fantastic book about this. He argues that in part, thanks to Mandela's actions, SA became an economic apartheid, which was just as bad for people in the townships than actual apartheid. He also supported Mbeki's assertions that HIV didn't cause AIDS, and that antiretroviral drugs were a Western conspiracy. The thing is, weighed against the good he did SA and how he helped that country heal, perhaps it isn't that significant. It just annoys me that people are completely unwilling to recognize any of these pretty big flaws. Story 17. I'll just repost my answer to a question similar to this that was posted a while back. James Cameron. His movies are great, but he's such an. There's a reason why the crews to your movies are constantly revolting against you. Edit. Here's some stuff about him. He's been married 5 times. His marriage to Linda Hamilton ended after just 8 months because he was caught cheating with Susie Amos, who played Rose's granddaughter in Titanic. He calls agnosticism cowardly atheism. Orson Scott Card described him as selfish and cruel while working on the novelization To the Abyss. After working with Cameron on Titanic, Kate Winslet decided she would not work with him again unless she earned a lot of money. She said that Cameron is a nightmare to work with. Studios have come to fear his habit of straying way over schedule and over budget. He is notorious on set for his uncompromising and dictatorial manner, as well as his flaming temper. Sam Worthington said Cameron would use a nail gun to nail the crew's cell phones to a wall in retaliation for unwanted ringing during production of Avatar. The first editor of The Terminator got fed up with Cameron and refused to edit the movie to Cameron's specifications. He did it so he could get fired. The crew that worked on Aliens walked off the set. The entire crew. They eventually came back after a lengthy negotiation and an apology from Cameron for his conduct. Composer James Horner refused to work with him for 10 years after doing the score to Aliens. Ed Harris and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio still refused to talk about their experience working with him on The Abyss. Some few things that are known is that Cameron ordered the actors to go to the bathroom in their diving suits to save time between takes, and every actor in the movie had major breakdowns at some point during the production of the movie. One of the few things that Harris has said is that he was driving home one day while shooting and spontaneously started crying, and he had to pull to the side of the road until he stopped. Mastrantonio has just said it was a horrible experience. The cast had to relieve their anger by completely destroying their dressing rooms, tossing couches and ripping the walls apart. Cameron has admitted that the only reason why he made Titanic was to get the studio to finance his dive to the actual ship. He went to the studio, opened a book of Titanic paintings and said, "This ship, Romeo and Juliet." They greenlit the movie on the spot. His reputation is legendary in the business. During the 70th Golden Globe Awards, Amy Poehler joked about the controversy around the depiction of torture in Zero Dark 30, a film co-produced and directed by Cameron's second wife, Catherine Bigelow. Poehler said, "When it comes to torture, I trust the lady who spent 3 years married to James Cameron." Story 18. Steve Harvey. He was married 3 times and cheated. All 3 times. As a result, he was divorced 3 times. Still writes book on relationships. Not to mention his views, lack of understanding of evolution. Story 19. Steve Harvey seems to always be put on a fast track to sainthood, but really, he is just a religious extremist and misogynist with incredibly scary warped views of the world and how it should be. Story 20. Oliver Cromwell is massively praised and amdired in Britain, often making it into lists of the top 10 greatest Britons in British history. Meanwhile, he is universally vilified in Ireland and regularly makes it into lists of the top 10 greatest villains in Irish history. I find it quite amazing that the British ignore his genocidal campaigns in Ireland and prefer to erect massive statues of him outside their parliament instead. Wiki bio of the dickhead here. Story 21. Will probably get downvoted to the bottom pits of hell, but Ernest Hemingway. He was anti-Semitic, bigoted, racist, sexist, the whole nine yards. Edit. I would like to add that I'm not sure if horrible is the best way to describe him. Given the era he lived in, his views were more than likely institutionalized. But unpleasant is a word I would definitely use. Story 22. John Wayne. I believe in white supremacy, at least to a point where blacks are responsibly educated. He was also an aggressive drunk and was also a draft dodger despite playing heroic roles. Story 23. Pablo Picasso, genius artist though he undeniably was, treated the people in his life like affairs on top of affairs. He drove his first wife into a mental breakdown and literally turned their only son into Picasso's chauffeur. He had a child with his first mistress, who he played mind games with on a daily basis for the rest of her life. After he died, she killed herself. His second mistress he drove into a mental breakdown. His third, he physically abused. He did have 2 children with her, who he refused to legally acknowledge for years. And his second and final wife, treated like a doormat, who also ended up killing herself after he died. Oh, and after he died, his second wife barred all of his previous family from his funeral, including his grandson, who was so distraught by this he killed himself too. Amazing. Amazing artist. But totally fucking sadistic in how he treated the people around him. Story 24. A bit late to the party, but I think an important person to mention on this topic is Salvador Dali. He was a big supporter of the fascist Franco movement in Spain in the 1930s. To make things worse, his former, I guess, best friend led a resistance against Franco. Dali betrayed him, got him killed, and destroyed the resistance. Also, there are a lot of reports of him having his boy toys. Young teenage boys who he would have as his students, but he allegedly sold their pieces as his for a lot of money, and keeping it, and had sexual relationships with them, sexually abused them. Story 25. Dr. Dre. The most gangster thing he ever did was beat up a woman at a party, then hid behind Suge Knight so he wouldn't get beat up. Not that I'm advocating violence against women, just saying that guy's a big phony. Story 26. Mahatma Gandhi comes to mind when asked this question. There seems to be a universal agreement that he was a great man and always did the right thing, but quite a few Indians, specifically Hindus and Sikhs, despise the man. He was actually quite a terrible leader and mishandled a lot of things. Some blame him for the atrocious deaths that could have been prevented if not for his non-violence approach to everything, and a lot of people blame him for the separation of India and Pakistan. He was two-faced. While on the surface he preached of a united India, at the same time he was sending letters to Muslim leaders motivating them to fight for partition. He was a terrible leader, and not many people outside of India know much about that. He was just a puppet of the British rule, who convinced the Indian population to not use violence while the British continued to do so. He was in fact a horrible person. And I haven't even mentioned the fact that he was sexist, racist while in South Africa, and commonly made 15-16-year-old girls sleep naked in his room, including his grandniece. Edit. Added some more info based off comments below. Story 27. Kissinger. Edit. For all those saying that everyone knows he was I've met people who think he was great, so from my personal experiences I've seen praise of him. Story 28. Arnold Schwarzenegger. Illegitimate child with a maid working in his house, reduced the sentence of a convicted murderer for a political friend, sign into law the biggest tax increase in California ever while campaigning for lower taxes, and an overall disgusting political weasel. Story 29. Jimmy Page, guitarist for Led Zeppelin, liked younger girls. Edit. By younger, I mean he dated and pretty much kidnapped a 14-year-old Lori Maddox. I still love Zepp. Story 30. Gene Simmons. If you look through his music history, you can see that he was a womanizing racist. Also extremely inappropriate and informal when it comes to official business or interviews. Story 31. Fucking Gandhi. Super racist, educated in South Africa, and showed the whites what real racism was. Terrible attitude towards women. All round, actually. Wish I was at my computer so I could find and post some proof. I hesitate to mention Nelson Mandela, because it won't be a popular notion at all, But he wasn't thrown in jail for being black or opposing the oppressive white man. Yes, he was black and did oppose the oppressive white man, but he did it with explosives and terror tactics. His time in jail turned him into the leader he was, both by making him a symbol and by calming and reforming him. Story 32, Lauryn Hill would frequently not show up to her own shows, and when she did, she was often too wasted or drugged out to play properly. She would also demand that her co-artists, including the rest of the Fugees, call her Ms. Hill or Empress. She also blamed slavery for her tax evasion sentencing in 2013, to which she spent 3 months in jail for. Story 33, Ronald Reagan, was probably involved in the Iran-Contra affair and dealing with Iran before the election against Carter. Republican ties let Iran know they'd get a better deal if they waited until after the election was decided to release the hostages, after which Reagan's staff sold them weapons for gold, which was then funneled into South American right-wing terrorist organizations that killed thousands of people in cold blood. That and his economic policies have led to a lot of the we are dealing with today. Story 34, Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton. I don't care what race you are, how can you think of these two as anything but utterly disgusting? Oh, and Al Sharpton is currently being investigated for selling out. Edit. Spelling. Story 35, The Duggars. While I don't have a problem with their lifestyle, I have a problem with them trying to take down anyone who doesn't share their values. I mean, have as many kids as you well please. But don't use your fame from that to try, and unfortunately succeed, in making the lives of homosexuals difficult in Arkansas. If what they're doing is immoral, that's their problem, not yours. Just let them be happy, damn it. Story 36. I am strongly in favor of using poisonous gas against uncivilized tribes. Churchill, on how Britain should deal with the Iraqi Revolution against British rule in 1920. Story 37. Did anyone say Guy Fawkes yet? A religious extremist, and he fought against the Dutch on the side of those pesky Spanish in the 80 Years' War. Story 38. The dude, American Sniper, portrays. He wasn't regretful, but giddy about killing. Even shooting women and children he found pleasure in, just because they were Middle Eastern. Story 39. Timothy Leary, praised for his work with LSD, when in all actuality his stupidity set it back rather than progressing it. Plus, he was just a terrible person in general. Story 40. Ray Lewis. He murdered someone, and then when he wins a Super Bowl, everyone seemed to forget about it. And the cherry on top, he's the mentor for coaches with anger management in that new Spike show. Story 41. Gandhi was also a big old racist. He fought for segregation from Indians, Europeans, and had a strong distaste for black people in his office, so much so that he joined the 1906 war against the Zulu tribes in Africa. He fought for the British, but when it was killing black people, but no violence against the British when they were in control of India. Story 42. Joseph Stalin is considered by many to have been a great leader during the Second World War. He did kill millions of people, no one knows exactly how many. Story 43, Ronald Reagan. Economic policy that didn't work, war on drugs that didn't work, unnecessarily aggressive foreign policy, and some pretty awful scandals. Story 44, Watson and Crick. Annoying pricks that stole work from others and put it together in a bar to submit a one-page paper to Nature and claim they discovered DNA. Not only was their work not theirs, but Watson constantly makes racist and sexist remarks. Story 45. A lot of liberal hippie types will display pictures of Che Guevara, without understanding that he was a ruthless, bloodthirsty sociopath who took personal pleasure in torturing and murdering people. Story 46, Mother Teresa. She said that people needed to suffer to be closer to God, and would deny medical care to people under her care, so they would suffer and die. One case that changed my opinion was a teenage boy had a kidney problem easily fixed by surgery, but the nuns of the order refused to allow him to be taken, and instead just gave him aspirin and waited for him to die. She also diverted a lot of the money donated meant to for helping poor people towards extreme pro-life positions, including stopping legal contraceptions. Story 47. Marion Zimmer. Bradley was a prolific and celebrated fantasy author who wrote The Mists of Avalon and the Darkover series, among other things. She also married a man she knew to be a pedophile, helped him get access to children, and covered for him when people started thinking something was up, and abused her daughter to the extent that her daughter considers her to be even worse than her husband. Story 48. Before they deleted her from Rate My Professor. Calm Maya Angelou had some of the worst reviews I've ever seen on that site. Pretentious, condescending, and impatient were some of the ways her students described her. She didn't have a single positive review. I wish I had taken a screenshot for this very moment. Oh well. Story 49. Feynman was super sexist and apparently thought women weren't built for science. As my father used to say, diplomas take away ignorance, but douchebaggery prevails. Translated from another language, it doesn't sound as funny. Oh well. Story 50. It's the only place in the world that does to such an extent. But I live in Utah, and people idolize Joseph Smith and Brigham Young beyond all reason. Both were awful human beings, and it isn't hard to find absolutely damning things about either. Story 51. I remember in college reading that George Washington was an awful tactician. He was much better politician than general. Don't know if that makes him a horrible person, though. Story 52. Arnold Schwarzenegger. Everyone on Reddit loves him because he browses r/fitness and posts from time to time. When he cheated on his wife with a housemaid and kept his illegitimate son a secret for 13 years. Story 53. George Lopez. On top of being only mildly funny on the rare occasion, he needed a kidney transplant in '04, and his wife Anne donated one. He then proceeded to take said kidney and cheat on his wife. Story 54. Steven Tyler of Aerosmith. When he was 27, he had a 14-year-old girlfriend he didn't want to separate from when he went on tour. His lawyers worked with her parents to sign legal guardianship of her over to Steven before they went on a tour. She gets pregnant and it gets even crazier from there. The rest of this is based on her testimony only. She gets knocked out after answering the door one night and awakes in a house fire. She believes the people who knocked her out were associates of Steven's. Steven then demanded she get a late-term abortion in a private room. She states the baby was born alive and, gulp, had the back of his skull crushed in by the band-hired doctor. Apparently it was a boy. I feel like a traitor for repeating this because I do love me some old Aerosmith. Story 55. I assume when you say we, you mean we as a society? I don't particularly praise anyone, but I notice people tend to think highly of useless celebrities even though they aren't worthy of it. Story 56. Che Guevara was an absolute who admitted he murdered people without bothering to properly try them, using the excuse that the revolution didn't have time for a fair trial. Story 57. Nelson Mandela. He was a racist, anti-white terrorist who advocated a bombing that killed young children. He was locked up on Robben Island because he had committed treason and was considered a threat to the public, not because he was black. If it had just been down to race, then why not just kill him in the street one day? Story 58. Winston Churchill wanted to start World War III against Russia the moment Germany was divided up. Edit. Oh, and William Wallace. After the Battle of Stirling Bridge, he skinned one of the English lords and made a belt out of the skin. Even for the time, that was needlessly barbaric. Story 59. I suppose Jeremy Clarkson. I really enjoy the humor in what he does for the show, but that doesn't mean he should be allowed to punch his boss. I really hope they don't completely boot him from the show, though. Story 60. Ronald Reagan sold weapons to Iranian kidnappers and funneled the money to South American warlords. Definition of treason. He also gave Saddam technology to build WMD and intelligence to use it against Iran and his own people. Reagan is practically being worshipped by conservatives. Story 61. John Lennon. Not only was his talent blown out of proportion, Imagine is probably the most overrated song of all time, and unintelligent, he was clueless about social issues. He was a pretty horrible person in general. He would beat his family and verbally abuse his son Julian, who stated publicly that Paul was more of a father to him. On one occasion, Julian was laughing and John yelled, "I hate the way you fucking laugh," and sent him away. There is a long list of horrible things he has done. Story 62. Winston Churchill. Guy was a bad dude, didn't want women to vote, used chemical weapons on Kurds, and allegedly allowed Coventry to be destroyed amongst other things. Was great for quotes, though. Story 63 came in late, so I'm sure this gets 0 upvotes, but Christopher Columbus, he was a raping, pillaging, absolute son of a. It is so bad there has been numerous attempts to get rid of Columbus Day. Story 64. Steve Jobs. Misogynist, all but abandoned his daughter for years to most people he met. Most Appleites will tell you that he sucked as a boss and that Tim Cook is far better. He deserved to get fired by his own company, as he did early on. Story 65. Marlon Brando showed up to Apocalypse Now. 50 lbs, overweight, and didn't know a single word of his lines, which is the reason he appears in shadows that whole movie. He was supposed to be worn and marine. He's also notorious for being extremely difficult to work with on sets, often never memorizing his lines and having cue cards. Side note, they actually slaughtered a cow during the sacrifice scene, and Martin Sheen, who has spoken about this, was actually tripping on acid, which they put in his water during that one scene. Edit. The fact that he didn't prepare for roles and was reading cue cards makes his acting even more impressive. Story 66. Nelson Mandela. He advocated for the ANC to renounce its non-violent strategy and engage in violent acts. His MK terrorists were responsible for killing hundreds of innocent people. His wife, Winnie Mandela, was a real winner as well. She was infamous for necklacing people, i.e., burning people alive with tires and gasoline up until the 1980s. Story 67. It's going to be a super unpopular opinion, especially on Reddit, but I went to go see a Neil deGrasse Tyson show quite recently, and it was awful. It was racist, bashed religion in a very illogical, unfair way, and had no real science in it. It was more stand-up, awful stand-up, but stand-up nonetheless, than a presentation I would expect from such a prestigious astrophysicist like Dr. Tyson himself. I lost an enormous amount of respect for Dr. Tyson that night. Story 68. MLK. Yeah, civil rights and all that, but he called the blues and rock and roll the devil's music and had very conservative views on. Rock and roll is not the devil's music, goddammit. Story 69. Johnny Cash's car engine overheated and he just left it to burn instead of finding help. The fire killed roughly 50% of the living population of the American condor. He then went on to say, "Idgaff about your buzzards." Story 70. Nelson Mandela. He's often portrayed as a friendly, humble freedom fighter, when in fact he was far from being a good person. He was head of the terrorist wing of the South African Communist Party. He even pleaded guilty to 156 acts of public violence, including terrorist bombing campaigns, which planted bombs in public places, including the Johannesburg railway station. Many innocent people, including women and children, were killed by his acts. Story 71. There's currently a lot of controversy surrounding Mother Teresa for the following reasons. 1. She had very extreme views on abortion. She believed it was unacceptable no matter the circumstances and talked about the beauty of raising a rapist's child. In her clinics, she would often refuse to give patients any pain medication, believing that to suffer, it was to be close to Christ. She herself would face her death with the comfort of painkillers. 3. More controversial to the Catholic Church than anything, she seemed to have lost her faith in God later in life. Writings of hers have been uncovered which suggest that she was playing lip service to the church and in reality no longer believed. Conspiracists will allege that the church is actively suppressing her writings in order to hide this fact, given that she has had sainthood bestowed upon her. Story 72. Snoop Dogg, or Lion, or whatever his name is now. People seem to forget that he actually murdered someone but got away with it. But everyone praises him as a chill dude who smokes weed and advocates for legalization. Story 73. Gandhi. Dude supposedly required young girls in his bed at night for some weird cult leader type reason, and let his wife die because he insisted she refuse medical treatment. But then when he got sick, he got all the treatment he needed. Story 74. Joseph Stalin. Man was much worse than Hitler, yet he's hailed a hero for being with the Allies in World War II. He was a true monster, as were the Russian troops.